great week this week as my phone starts beeping. Hold on a second. I'm probably like, nope, I'm not feedback looping. Thank goodness. But I had a great week this week at Front Sight. Got to shoot some machine guns and go through a very intensive firearms training course that was just unbelievable out there. If you've never been to Front Sight, you ought to go. But yeah, we're back. I'm exhausted. If you're wondering how I got a sunburn in January in the middle of winter, it's because I've been out in the middle of the Nevada desert about a mile on the other side of the California border. And wow, what an education out there. But anyway, John, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be back.
You're welcome. Good to have you back. And we got more. We talked about having you back on a few weeks ago to go more in depth on all of this good stuff. And so, what do you got for us tonight, John?
We covered quite a bit. I thought maybe we would. Well, maybe I should start with that. There's a little picture of the book. So within there, I got to get a better habit of doing that. I tend to
Right.
just jump
Well,
into the
I had
ideas.
it sitting here to hold
Oh,
up next,
okay.
but I mean, you'll have to ask John for a special autograph copy like mine. But
I can send those if you can email me. I'll have a limited number of those, and then I got it sitting up there. If you can see. We covered quite a bit. I think precision education it would be something we didn't talk about. We've got augmented reality in the curriculum. We've got virtual reality in the curriculum. And then we've talked a little bit about the artificial intelligence, but we might touch a little bit more on that as it relates to those two technologies. And then solutions, right? So we've talked a lot about problems. Take a look at some solutions, and it's like a 5-point bullet. I think we got.
And just really quickly, Steve, thanks for the $10 donation. Really appreciate that. Throw in your super chats. Of course, the show is listener sponsored. Always has been. So you can throw up a super chat or go to logosmedia.com and support the show that way. There's also Bitcoin and all. Hey, everybody in the chat, good to have you here. We're broadcasting, or I guess it's simulcasting on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, etc. So I'll try to keep up on where all of the chats and whatnot are coming from. Somebody says they feel angry. So sorry that you're feeling angry here. Just tune in tonight and, we'll tell you some more truth that'll probably make you feel even more angry. But so anyway, let's see. Why don't we dive into augmented reality?
Okay. So if your viewers aren't familiar, it helps to talk about both of VR and AR just a little bit at the same time. So, because virtual reality is probably easier to understand, right? So you put this head device on, these goggles. A lot of you probably use them. I've tried them once, and basically you're in a virtual 3-dimensional world. Most of them are for video games and stuff nowadays. But there's a move to basically make active lessons curriculums through those devices, right? So performance-based learning is another buzzword. Education has tons of buzzwords. I should say this. I didn't say this last time. Education has tons of buzzwords that when they lose their popularity, they just kind of change the name, but it's the same thing later. And so performance-based,
Well, yeah, and it's like communism is now progressivism, because communism, they don't like that word anymore, so they just rename it. And then it's progressivism, but it's the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, so politically, we see the same thing with political rhetoric as well. We've talked about the rhetorical similarities between communism and fascism, right? And then how if you have a left-wing establishment or a right-wing establishment, right, they might call it one thing or the other, but it's in many ways it's just a merger of the public and private sector.
Well, fascism was created by Mussolini after Nazism, which is technically socialism. It was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So the big thing that nobody wants to admit is that the Nazis were leftists, not right-wingers. That's the big, the big secret that nobody wants to admit. National Socialist German Workers' party. That's like the same thing as the Democrats or the Labour Party in the UK. Labour Party, Workers' Party, hello. So these are leftist organizations.
Well, Mussolini started off as a socialist as well, right?
Right.
What people might pick at me and say that I'm over conflating would say that, okay, the reason why they would call fascism right wing is that it is nationalist as opposed to internationalist in scope. So the communists proper were right, the Comintern, the international communist state. The national socialists were nationalists. So a lot of people say fascism is basically the same as communism, except that it has to be nationalist, and usually there's like a racial
right,
and a militant component,
and then you have your national scapegoat that you use to pin all your problems on, right? Yes. And then that one group becomes the scapegoat for anything bad that happens, and then that way, rather than the socialists accepting responsibility or the communists accepting responsibility for anything that they are doing negative, then it gets tied onto the scapegoat and sent off over there, and then everybody chases and murders the scapegoat, right?
And eventually it comes back to eat the people that were scapegoating to begin with. So if you know that Hitler, he was in with the Thule Society, right?
Yeah.
What did he do?
Somebody has a funny question for you, John.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully, well, just take it with a grain of salt. He says, hi, and thanks for the super chat, Teddy. He says, hi, keep up the great work, Jan. Also asked John if he took his ADD pills today, or is he going to go off track like last time?
At the beginning of the thing, I was going to say, the first thing I was going to say was, I ate right beforehand. I did like Jan said. I got some fats in me. I had a steak and I had a bunch of nutrients in me. I was gonna try to nap, but all I could do was think about preparing for this, so I couldn't nap. So hopefully it won't happen. But I've noticed about the 45-minute point when I do these, yeah, it's like mental fatigue sets in, and I notice like I'll have all these thoughts in my head, and like the fifth or sixth thought will fall off, and I'm like, whoops, and it slips away. But hopefully I'm prepared this time. I'm nutritioned up.
That's funny.
Yeah, but so the Thule Society, see, I'm right back on it this time. The Thule Society.
Are you talking about the Thule Society?
Yeah,
like
Thule Society. I've heard people say Thule.
Baron von Sabatendorf, who was the Muslim who created the closet Muslim who created the Nazi Party, etc. That I covered on the show with Todd a few months back.
Yeah, many times, right? And then eventually, right, Hitler went after all of the occult groups, right? And towards the end there, he went after them because basically it's what Stalin said. If you got me into power, you can get me out. And so,
oh, right. Well, yeah, and it's, yeah, for sure. So they gotta kill everybody who helped him. It's like Islam will use the left to gain power, and then who are the first ones they're going to wipe out once they get into power? The left. They got to.
So with the performance-based learning, let's before I forget, before my ADHD kicks in and I can't get back to it, the performance-based learning is related to the virtual reality and the augmented reality. In other words, instead of you learning an abstract concept, through studying literature, etc., discussion. Instead of learning it in the abstract sense, basically you learn it through doing or through performing. This goes back to John Dewey. He was big into, he wouldn't have called it quite that, but learn by doing would be a Deweyan pedagogy. So the idea is that you'll learn more effectively because you'll be able to participate in the activity instead of just have like an abstract textbook idea of it. So virtual reality, you put this thing on, you got some. I'm
gonna pull up John Dewey here in the database for a second because okay. I'm gonna show this on screen. You won't be able to see it, but I want to show this to the audience. All right.
Okay. Should I keep talking as you show?
Yeah, you just keep talking while I'm showing this. But I just wanted to mention. Actually, you know what? Let me throw it because
explicate. Go ahead. Explicate.
Yeah. Let me do that because. So here we have John Dewey. He was a member of the Fabian Society. Fabian Socialist, which, of course, we have Aldous Leonard Huxley, whom, of course, John covers in his book, David Rockefeller, the Frankfurt School, H.G. Wells, London School of Economics, all these people that those who are familiar with the show over the years know that we've repeatedly exposed these same clowns behind all this. But John Dewey was a part of them. He was also a member of the Century Club, which I've exposed many times in the past. The Century Club had key people in it like CIA DCI Alan Dulles, and of course R. Gordon Wasson, who was in charge of the CIA's MKUltra subproject 58, and he popularized magic mushrooms through Maria Sabina, and he created that whole fraud, using her to kick off the psychedelic revolution. And of course, another infamous member of the Century Club was, well, we haven't mentioned him for a few seconds, Aldous Huxley. And other people associated with the Century Club is Carlos Castaneda, the teachings of Don Juan and stuff. And then other well-known CIA frauds that I've exposed for years, Joseph Campbell, and who created the hero's journey and all that. He's behind the creation of Star Wars and using Star Wars to promote this whole agenda out to the public. And he was behind the CIA and SRI's Changing Images of Man project. But all of this stuff, we can, if we back up here, we can see John Dewey was right in the middle of this stuff. He's also tied under Wilhelm Wundt, University of Leipzig, where Edward Bernays went to school. That influenced the Tavistock Institute. Of course, Edward Bernays was pals with R. Gordon Wasson, whom we just mentioned, and he worked with the CIA, et cetera. So it's a great big circle jerk of the same clowns that we repeatedly see involved in all this stuff. And John Dewey was behind the New School for Social Research, again tied to the Fabian Society, Bertrand Russell, Margaret Mead, who was Gregory Bateson's wife. He was behind the creation of the CIA. These people did lots of fraudulent research and whatnot. So anyway, I just wanted to preface that with some background on what John Dewey was involved in. So back to you, John.
Okay, yeah, and so I mean, I just jump in there too, and so he's also a hardcore socialist. He was also a Hegelian, and he was also it was John B. Watson got his PhD from Dewey. John B. Watson was a behaviorist, right, and he went on to work in advertising, and also he's referenced in Brave New World, which we talk about in the other interviews as well. He's also linked to the Order of Skull and Bones, and through Daniel Coit Gilman, who was perhaps one of the most important people in education that you've never heard of, or he's certainly someone that I never heard of until way after I got out of school for whatever reason. Of course, there's a lot of things they didn't give me in school necessarily that I learned on my own later, but that was one that, me being in education, as important as he sat on the Carnegie, I always get them mixed up. There's the Carnegie Corporation, there's the Carnegie Foundation, there's the Carnegie Institute. It's the one that oversaw science in America, right? So invested in science projects and a bunch of eugenics stuff. He was also on the General Education Board. That was one of Rockefeller's first philanthropies before he actually had his Rockefeller Foundation. And he also set up Johns Hopkins University, and then there's two others. I want to say one is Cornell, and then the third one escapes me. It's Berkeley. It's California Berkeley. Barclay is actually how you'd say what they call it. Berkeley. It's after the philosopher Barclay. But and so that's So those are his links to the order. But he was all about the performance-based stuff, okay, and so that gets us back to the virtual reality and the augmented reality. Okay, so the virtual reality, it's you're basically immersed in a digital world three-dimensionally through these goggles. Augmented reality is kind of a blend of both. So if you might have seen some of these devices. You can use them on a tablet. You can use them on a phone. You can put them, if anybody has a Google Glass or one of those types of transparencies. It's either through a camera lens on a computer or through a transparency on a computer. And basically what it's doing is it's overlaying the 3D digital graphics onto the real world. So it's basically virtual environment overlaid onto the real environment. That Pokemon Go game is a good one. People talked a lot about back when it was popular. So maybe you have kids, they played with it. You got this phone, you had to hunt for the little Pokemon monster, and somehow you use this GPS device locator, and then it shows you where it's at. And when you show up in this location and you hold your screen up, if you look through the screen, you can see the little monster Pikachu or whatever the things are called, and you can interact with it. So this is augmented reality, and then virtual reality. You're fully immersed. Okay. And so they're trying to basically do performance-based lessons through these. Now, this is nothing that like is in any schools right now that I'm aware of, but it is certainly, if you read the scholarly journals that I've dug through, it is. Am I talking too loud?
No. Just unfortunately, like you said, they've already got published papers, but just don't give them any bad ideas. It's like.
Oh, okay. Again, I guess my dad said I was too loud. He said, "Don't talk so loud this time." I was like, "Uh-oh."
Well,
Okay.
I can adjust your microphone volume a little bit on this side.
Okay. I mean, if I am, yeah. So I mean, it's not something you're going to walk into a classroom and see, but they're ready to go with it for the most part. And Kurzweil talked about it back in the '90s. Ray Kurzweil. I cite 3 of his books in mine:
Yeah.
The Age of Intelligent Machines, which is '91; The Age of Spiritual Machines, which is '98; and then The Singularity is Near, which is 2000. I'm not sure when. It might be 2000.
Yeah, and he's part of the transhumanism mind op, Unitarianism. He had big influence over Jason Silva, but of course Google is another CIA-founded organization through In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel, CIA owns In-Q-Tel, In-Q-Tel owns Google, Google owns YouTube, etc. And of course Ray Kurzweil is there. But who created the term transhumanism? Do you know that one, John?
And that was Julian Huxley in New Bottles for New Wine.
Julian Huxley, right there in the database. Folks, you never go far from a Huxley family member with any of this degenerate crap. So I don't think we ever get more than, 4 or 5 steps in researching any of these topics before we hit a Huxley family member. Whenever you see the name Huxley show up, you know that you're holding a hot, stinky turd, whether it's Darwinism, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's transhumanism, or whatever the case may be. It's a hot, stinky, steaming pile.
I wanted to mention him when I mentioned Daniel Coit Gilman, because they were buddies, and he brought him over to give the inaugural address at Johns Hopkins University. He talked about his Malthusian, Darwinian eugenics stuff, and when in his memoirs, which I have over here, he makes these strange allusions. This is Huxley, I'm saying. These letters to his wife about how they made such a big deal out of him when he went to Yale, and how he sat in the family of a family member of one of the Peabodys, and the Peabodys are all tied into all these foundations, Rockefellers, etc. One of the big education philanthropies with the General Education Board back then. Yeah. So it doesn't. Yeah. It's those are interesting little
the audience is laughing, and I don't know. You've probably heard us talk about it before, but the Huxleys come up so much over the years in research. There's like the audience has a drinking game whenever the Huxley family is mentioned.
You told me that last time. Yeah, I remember.
So,
and you said they were written hammered last time.
Well, it's not the first time, but they'll get pretty hammered in the audience there when we say Huxley so much. Now, Rainey, thank you for the super chats in there. Greatly appreciate it. She's asking, is Blue Beam Project augmented reality? Do you know anything about that?
I am not familiar with Blue Beam.
Let me see if I have Blue Beam in the database.
That sounds like it might sound like a bumpkin here. When I hear Project Blue Beam, is that UFO stuff like Project
Maybe.
Blue
I don't have it in the database. I don't know. It could be fake news, but that just because it's not in the database doesn't mean it is. So I'd have to research that out.
Wait. If I remember this, the Project Blue Beam, I think, was the fake. It was this document. I don't know if it was legit or not, but the story I remember about it was that it was a military plan to project a fake alien landing onto the sky.
So Rational Wikipedia says Project Blue Beam is a conspiracy theory that claims that NASA is attempting to implement a New Age religion with the Antichrist at its head and start a new world order via technology simulated second coming. Actually, that's, from my research and whatnot, that's not that far-fetched. I haven't really looked into Project Blue Beam specifically, but we've certainly seen all of this stuff promoted, and they certainly promote the Antichrist, as the foundation of all of this stuff. Even, Huxley, Leary, all of these guys admit this stuff. Sorry, you guys, I know you're getting wasted out there. But
That might be AR. I guess when I think of AR, I think of where the image is somehow being projected through the device that you're handling. But I suppose it is largely the same idea. It's largely a digital image. I mean, it's projected like onto the sky digitally with lasers or something, as far as I understood it. So I mean, but it's certainly not that type of technology. It's not what we're talking about when we're talking about tablets or headgear or something like that.
somebody keeps beeping my phone, so I'm muting it. Whoever you are, stop. Everybody knows I'm on the air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m., so it's like, okay, who's up to nonsense?
Oh, I didn't hear it buzz, so I don't think
Okay,
it distracted
good.
anyway. Yeah. So yeah, Kurzweil, this is in one of his earlier books. He mentions the VR. He uses this example of, instead of studying the Constitution and the Federalist Papers and the writings of the founding fathers, etc., you would just go into this VR simulation. You'd sit down with Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, and you could have a conversation with him, and he would tell you exactly what he thinks, the way he would say it. And it sounds maybe cool or interesting, but I have a lot of problems with that because I don't understand how they could possibly. Kurzweil thinks he can bring his dad back.
Yeah, well,
He thinks that he can scan all of his dad's writings, and this is before they had digital stuff. So,
right. Well,
but
it's going to be based on writings and letters, not the culmination of their life experience and everything. So it's going to be this digital kind of sketchy
yes, that's the
thing.
short. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I could almost see there's some Black Mirror episodes where there was a guy that dies and they scan somehow through all his social media posts and all the ubiquitous filming that is our life now. They basically could simulate his personality by inductively aggregating all that data into some kind of algorithm. Now that maybe I don't know that that's you and you're actually bringing your dad back. But I don't
What
think
was
you're going
that?
to do that.
What was that
Papers. I
movie
don't
or
think so.
There was a movie or something I saw a few years ago. What the hell was that? Where where it like simulated that somebody who had died. And it would they would call you, would talk to you or whatever, and it would simulate that person was still alive based on all of their messages and everything that they had done online over their lifetime. What the heck movie was that? I don't know. Somebody will pull it up. But if the person died, you could go around and talk to the person on your phone, and it was the AI system like feeding you. It would take all the emails and texts and messages and phone conversations and everything that the person had ever done online, and it would create that person so that you felt that they didn't actually die.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's probably a few. There's a show called Feed now, which is kind of, it's not like that, but it's all about augmented reality. These people have these chips where they have AR basically implanted through their head. So I guess I
Rupert
could jump there. Go ahead.
Rupert says atheists are lost and confused. Well said.
So with the brain chips, then basically, and the idea is, instead of carrying around the devices and having to do this all day, or having this big clunky piece of headgear on, basically the brain chip would somehow transmit it through your retina. Okay.
Right.
And it would, this is what our Internet
Right
of
into the
Things
CIA's Google machine, and then you could be like, tapped right in there, and they could, talk about, Huxley's final revolution. They just total control over anything that you think.
Sure, and these are the same. Facebook is making one. Google's Microsoft. These are all the companies that the main thing they operate on is, it's not money, it's data. I mean, data is the new oil of the current age, and yeah. So with the brain chips, basically, it's going to link straight into the Internet of Things, and this is largely what the Internet of Things is for. Okay, so all this 5G stuff, this is so they can have all this shortwave high-speed communication, because right, if you don't think you want your brain chip buffering, right? You're going to be sitting there, and I imagine your biology is also going to be kind of buffering, herky jerky or whatever. So they need
Yeah.
this super fast stuff. It's not so you can get media faster. I don't believe that. And so basically, you can kind of think of it like this. This is the cool side of it. This would be like, if maybe there was no dystopic elements involved. So imagine you're pulling up to the city, and as you pull up in the city, your brain chip
Well,
basically
it's
is
going to be a
reading.
fake city because it's all just going to be in your mind, right?
Well, that's I don't want to go on a segue too far here and go on my ADHD here, but Kurzweil says
I
that
think
you
you're
will
too late, brother.
probably Kurzweil says that you'll spend most of your time in VR, most of your time in VR, and so that means, I mean,
And
at what
whoever
level?
appealed to his authority to tell us to create all this crap to lead us down this nasty rabbit hole,
I mean, my first question is, wait. If we got so, the scenario he uses is, hey, you're on one side of the planet, your wife's on the other side, and you can't, you instead of just calling each other, you can actually participate in some 3D environment. You can experience this person as if they're with you. But then my question is, well, if everything is so advanced, why are me and my wife hundreds of miles away from each other? Like, if everything was so utopic, I feel like I could be with her all the time, right? So,
dystopic anyway. See, here's
yeah.
the thing: is all these atheists and Satanists and whatnot can't stand. They create these dystopias because they cannot stand logos. They cannot stand truth and reality. They want to have everything. They want to be the gods of their own dystopian nightmare, and they want to take us all down with them. And you and I were talking before the show about this. The communist agenda, the Brave New World agenda, Huxley again, and the Fabian socialists along with them, is to get rid of all morality, create moral relativism, create a state where there is no good and bad, and then through the allowance of pedophilia, murder, rape, no longer having men and women's separate bathrooms, everything coming to a state of degeneracy. Through this, these idiots believe that a utopia will emerge. Actually, it's a dystopia, but a utopia will emerge, and then we'll have this new reign of freedom and whatnot through total degradation and degeneracy through the entire fall and collapse of society. So it would basically, for anybody who lives in Logos and Truth, it would be a total hell nightmare, literally run by Satan.
Well, there certainly is. I mean, when I just mentioned VR, I've looked at it before. I've messed with it. It made me really dizzy. It was pretty cool. It made me dizzy enough where I didn't want to mess with it again. I used to play a lot of
Is that
games
what
when I was
happened to
younger.
you?
Oh, with the ADHD, yeah, it was too many video games growing up, probably. But I did. I used to play. I was one of these people. I'd spend a whole weekend in there. So I'm not gonna say I don't get it all, but as they say, I grew out of it. I just grew out of it, and but when I mention it to a lot of people, or you just kind of broach the topic, they're like, wow, I mean, to be saturated with those graphics is such an enticing experience. By the way, we should mention that Aldous Huxley talked about virtual reality in his book. He called it the feelies instead of the movies, right? So a movie is a moving picture. Well, for Huxley, you sat in these devices. This is 1931, by the way. And you put your hands on these things, and instead of seeing the picture moving, you felt it. And what were they watching? I read it several times till I realized what it was. It was a porn, and they're talking about how you could feel the bearskin rug on you because you were in the position of one of the lovers, I guess you'd say, right? And so yeah, this is 1931. They had set this thing called Sensorama, and I believe the 50s or the 60s. It looks silly. You can Google it. It looks super silly. It's like a big box type thing. It looks like one of those old arcade machines that we used to do in the 80s. That's got the big console with the joysticks, but you put your face in it and you sit on it, and it's got these gloves, and so it tries to interface with all the different, the five senses. And that was the 50s or 60s. Okay, and then so again with all this stuff, I mean, this is if I say the VR, if you haven't seen it, it's not in the classes yet. It's like, well, that sounds like, some wild stuff, but it's been long in the making, and it's here and right around the corner. But
And Ray
yeah,
Kurzweil is here to, see, first what they do is they make life miserable through all this social degradation and stupefaction and dumbing down of education, all this other stuff. And then they say, well, since life is so terrible, since we won't leave you alone with your family to have your own life, why don't you upload yourself into our freaking computer? Hey, we're here to save you. First we create the problem, now we're gonna offer you the solution. Thanks Ray Kurzweil and Joe Rogan and all these people who promote this crap.
Well, and then where I was kind of going is that a lot of people, like you said, virtual reality is way cooler than reality, don't you know that? Like it's
oh yeah, because you can just make it what you will, because when you know what the word, if you know the words that the world is made of, you can make of the world what you wish. To quote some Terrence McKenna horse crap.
Yeah, that sounds like, I remember that. I was like, who is that? I was trying to think.
To a didgeridoo, you got to boom, wow, wow, wow,
I'll admit that, like, the first time I used it with the, I was in the spaceship, and then you're up over this planet. I mean, it's exhilarating. It was pretty exhilarating. Like, so, in some ways, I guess, the initial experience, it's a little more surprising than the real world. But, then there's other games that were on there where it was like, you're just cooking. You're like cooking. So it's cooler. It was somehow moving around these three-dimensional hamburgers on this three-dimensional grill that was all cartoon and digital, was somehow supposed to be fun. I mean, maybe some people like cooking, but to me, it's a chore and labor. So it's like, in real life, it's labor and a chore, but in the virtual world, it's fun and it's a game. And,
right.
and that's on a larger trend, what they call gamified learning. It fits into this VR AR stuff.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to actually go out and learn the real facts of culinary arts and the science behind all the merging of the different chemicals that are in the foods and whatnot that create these flavors. You just do it in a virtual world. Amy says those are fun. I don't know if she's talking about what we're talking about, I'm guessing, but it'd be like front sight virtual world. It's like, sure, there's all these shoot 'em up games and blah 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 and whatnot, but it's not the same as getting on the ground and going through an intensive firearms course and learning all that stuff hands on. It's you're not going to come out of a VR thing having the same skill sets and whatnot.
Well, I think they feel that they can make more people learn if they just make it funner. If they just made it like it was the funnest thing in the world and you never wanted to stop doing it, then everybody could learn, right? And in essence, they want to remove the hard work and I'll use the word suffering that comes into achieving anything of a meaningful nature at a high level. And it doesn't matter if that's exercise physically or, learning something abstractly, intellectually. I loved writing this book. It's researching things I'm interested in, but especially when I have a deadline too. Guess what? I mean, there was times I didn't want to write it. I was tired. I want to go to bed, but I did it. And that's part of being a human. That's part of reality. That's part of truth.
Right.
But, so when the exhilaration ends, when the fun of the game ends, because when I used to play those games, there came a point when it was just more graphics, and it was just this kind of a rehashing of the same thing.
Yeah, Amy
you're
says
not actually achieving anything.
Amy says in the chat she loves cooking, but the VR kind of makes her feel sick. Yeah, but yeah, she was talking about that. Mr. Winters says thanks, good stuff, John. And he's got to run around and do some stuff, but he'll try to listen. So thanks for the super chat there, Mr. Winters. Appreciate it. And thanks for everybody participating in the chat there, too.
Oh, thanks to everybody that bought books, too, because I did notice that I can't see the specific numbers, but the metrics, I noticed that many people bought books both times. So thank you, whoever that was.
Yeah, let's, where did people buy your book again, John?
So we can do that at Trine Day. I had it up here and I don't know what happened. Trine
TrineDay.com or
Day, or you can go to that other big place. There it goes, Amazon. Um, it's on Barnes and Noble's distributor and Target distributor. I mean, but Trine Day is more for us. But I know some people got their right away accounts on Amazon and all that
right.
stuff, and their discounts and all that.
And I'll just call up Chris Milligan and harass him over there.
Harass him just a little bit there.
Just a little
Well, he's under. They're doing mercantile games with him right now, so don't harass him too much.
Oh yeah, what are the
Yeah,
mercantile games?
It is. Yeah, kind of messing with distributors and stuff like
okay.
that. It's kind of weird, wonky stuff that is, you're probably familiar with that in your world of media and book writing. And
well,
stuff.
there's always games, being throttled, being demonetized, being, there's always something going on with.
Yeah, I noticed there was for some reason that the price went way down on the book for a long time, and he's. No, I don't know what they got their own algorithms. I don't know how they run it. I don't know what it's based on.
Yeah, and then Amazon will undersell all the other people, including the publisher on the books and stuff. Yeah, I've seen that stuff too.
Yeah, stuff like that. Exactly. Stuff like that is what it seems to be.
Precision. Wait. Well, we talked about augmented reality, virtual reality. What about precision education and tying curriculum to genetics?
So that is basically, it's actually piggybacking on a term that's they use for what's called precision medicine. And so precision medicine is basically it's gene specific medicine. Okay. And so they basically just they're transferring that concept to academics, and basically a guy by the name of Robert Plomin, Plomin, maybe it's Plomin. I imagine it's Plomin. Only read it, never heard it pronounced. He is one of the larger proponents of it, and essentially he feels that we've talked about on the previous shows that your curriculum, you can be tracked either into an academic pathway or a career pathway for workforce training, and that could be based on your responses to the software and how quick you answer the questions and how well you answer them. But Plowman's saying that before we even start there, we should actually check out your brain IQ, right? And so your genetic IQ. And the thing with that is it's sketchy because there are many genes that they are looking at that they say contribute to your IQ. Right, and I want to say it's close to 50. It might be it's 50 or 500. It's once there's a 5 in there. I don't have my numbers in front of me. But so there's that part. But then there's also the other part with something they call the Flynn effect, right? Which makes whether or not we both clearly there are people who are on the what we today call the spectrum, right? So different autism spectrums. And so, we clearly, physiologically, that there are cognitive differences in people. I'm not going to say that that doesn't exist. But if you look at largely what we would call bell curve statistics is what we're talking about when we talk about IQ and genes. Okay. And that's, the famous book by Charles Murray and the other man who's no longer with us. So, on a bell curve, the idea is, right, it's kind of generalized that most people fit into this is the idea of the bell, statistically, most people fit in this fat part, right? But then there's always outliers for any race, right? Or they'll do this with female versus male sex, gender, etc.
Right.
But I think that in some ways, first of all, there's lots of questions about how accurate the tests are, whether they're actually measuring genes or environment, and also I think that I believe you might believe as well that logos that the understanding of truth, I think can maybe physiologically rewire your brain in ways. I mean, like when you come to logos through language and through truth, through the trivium, through understanding, contradictions and things like that, or reading those out, that
understanding
they
that a
develop new
contradict
habits of thinking
right,
that are no
understanding
longer
that
grounded in whatever that genetic base was
yeah,
before.
I actually had somebody tell me today that they thought that, that it was just about differing viewpoints. They don't grasp that a contradiction is always a lie or an error, and that there are no contradictions in nature. There cannot be. And so
Sure,
once you grasp that, that's the foundation of beginning to really learn logic and critical thinking, because once you can accept that reality is real and cannot lie to you, then you have something to build from. So what the left does, what these programs do, is to say, quantum physics, etc., is to say that, well, reality isn't real. We live in a quantum world. It's primacy of consciousness. The world is a reflection of you. You are not of reality. Reality is of you. So they flip everything backward and inside out and upside down. And in quantum physics, oh, well, there isn't one reality. There's 12 realities, and you could be living in these simultaneous realities all at once. So therefore, you can't know anything. It's just, everything is relative, right? It's Einsteinian. And it talk about the relativist fallacy, which is the relativist fallacy is what's true for me isn't true for you, and we have like a different reality. We might have differing points of view, but we're viewing the same reality. And so this is really hard for people to grasp when they start, because, well, there's so much befuddlement out there today to try to occlude and occult that reality is real. That's why they don't want people to understand the Bible and the New Testament, etc., because it teaches you that reality is first and foremost real, and that all of this other stuff is based on lies. So then what they do, and I'll let you hand it back to you, what they'll do from there is they'll say, well, all of this stuff that our ancestors taught, that's all nonsense. All your ancestors all throughout time, they were, even though they were successful and got you here and created you, they were a bunch of dumb frickin' morons, right? And so you have nothing to learn from your ancestors and all these high societies that they created through Christianity. That's all dumb nonsense. You can't know reality. Therefore, listen to us. And Oxford said last year they put out this thing that now we're in the post-truth era, right? So they come out with the modernist era, blah, 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 all these different eras that they come up with. Now we're in the post-truth era. So that's basically saying that truth doesn't exist. Now we're in the era of Satan.
Yeah. So, and then another thing with why I think that, that it is not that your intellect or your cognitive ability is not genetically determined. I'm not saying that there's no genetic basis to it, because obviously you have to have a brain to think, right? But another part of logos and understanding truth is understanding that that truth is most often outside of your passions and what you feel, or at least that sometimes it is, right? Now that sounds hilarious, right? But it's a profound thing for some people who are actually in this state where, see, the people that say that everything is relative.
John, my feels, brother, my feels.
Well, the thing
you're
is,
hurting my
right,
feels, dude. I'm offended.
The idea is to say that both sides are okay is in order to be able to justify your feelings, right? So that you don't have to say, oh, wait, you mean that this is wrong and I should actually act or think differently? It's a profound moment, myself included, because I was this is a wild man. I still am in some ways, but I was certainly a very wild man once upon a time. And when you realize that you don't have to be a wild, like that you don't have to be. You don't have to be whatever feelings you have, that you can actually think higher than them and outside them.
Yeah, well,
ride them like the horse.
When my son was about 6 or 7, got him this little science project, and it was like you put these little balls, or I don't know, it was like a chemistry thing, and you had these little hardened balls, they're like little tiny things, and you put them in water, and it created this slimy, jelly mess, so we put this in the big jar, and he got to create this big thing of slime he got to play with, right? And so, for a number of years after that, whenever we sat down to think about something, it's like, okay, so these are your emotions and these are the facts. So what we have to do is we put our emotions in the slime jar, and then we look at the facts, and then once we're done looking at the facts, we can open the jar and let the emotions back out again. But when you're thinking, the emotions need to go into the slime jar. And the liberals, the leftists today, they think that their emotions are the same and equivalent to the facts. They have no capacity to differentiate between facts and truth and their emotions, right? So they think if they put on, when we were kids, if you wanted to be someone else, you put on underoos and you ran around the backyard and you thought you were Superman or Spider-Man or whatever. But today, people put on whatever outfit, and then they think they're actually that thing. And then they want to pass laws to force everybody else to be a part of the delusion, right? It's no longer you in the delusion. It's, well, I'm actually Superman. I'm actually, it's like the latest thing was that I saw, I think yesterday, was this 40-some-year-old pedophile is now going around saying he's an 8-year-old girl and anything against him is hate speech.
So when you get to the place where you realize that you don't have to be your feelings, that you can actually go to that. I mean, that not only is that a different cognitive state or a different cognitive ability. I mean, that's like, this is what we call being born again. This is that you're a new person. Like, and in my own experience, I know that, I did horrible in high school because I was the wild man. And when I finally realized there was a different way to approach things with my mind and things. And by the way, still working on it, right? It's all the time.
And you're
why
cringing
we got to give each other grace all the time.
I notice
right?
you cringing when you say that.
Yeah. I mean, because like Paul says, the flesh, it sticks around, and so,
Paul, who is the chief of what does he say? When it comes to sinners, I am chief.
Yeah, right. He's the biggest out of all.
Right.
When I think about the flesh now differently in that verse now, I used to always think of it largely as sexual sin. Most people usually do. But now that I've thought a lot about the socio-emotional learning technologies and how basically they equate emotion with nervous system algorithms. That's the flesh. That's the flesh, and that's that thing when you feel it, right? When you're upset, you're frustrated, right, or you're depressed, and you're in those feelings. It very much is a physiological feeling. But when you realize that you don't have to actually be that there's ways to come above it, that's a new way of thinking. And so those are my philosophical reasons for having a problem with the precision education. But the other part is then, on top of that, is that there is also the possibility of an environmental effect. Okay, this is a thing called the Flynn effect. James Flynn, I believe is his first name, does a lot of IQ statistics. Charles Murray, they basically look at the same statistics, but they basically come to two different conclusions. And Charles largely says that it's basically your genes, although he admits some environment plays a factor. And Mr. Flynn basically says the opposite. It's mainly environment. The reason he says that is because, the reason why they have two interpretations is this: the Flynn effect is such as this. Every once in a while, every several years, they have to recalibrate IQ tests, which by the way is another reason why I'm not super comfortable with any of that philosophy of it being determined. Okay, so when they recalibrate these though, because what happens is everybody starts to do better at these tests, so they have to make them. They up the difficulty somehow, and what happens is the spread tends to be the same ethnically. Okay, and so the numbers that they calculate is that what they call white people, which is a really vague term, is at the median at 100, and then people of color would be progressively lower, 90, 80, 70. Okay, and then up in the above 100 would be East Asians and Ashkenazi Jews. And so when they switch that spread, they see that and they go, oh, Charles looks at it and he goes, look, the difference between races is the same, must be race. But Flynn goes, but look, everybody went up, so that means your IQ can go up, so must be environment. Okay, I think that, you know, in a civil society, in a democratic republic where we don't believe in a caste system, that if we go with precision education, like this is a genetic caste system, you know, and so you know, I am not a statistician, you know, I am not a biologist, so I know people might say, you know, poo-poo on my philosophies, but I am an educator, and you know, and I'm sort of a philosopher. So those are the reasons why I have a big problem with what they call precision education.
Right. Well, Rupert in the chat says, and the millennials will have a hard time with this reference, but we'll try to explain it. Disconnecting emotion from logic is like using the clutch in a car. And for those of you who don't know what a clutch was, which is most of you back in the days when most cars were stick shift, the clutch was what disconnected the transmission and the wheels from the engine and then allowed you to shift into the next gear. So yeah, it would be like, you know, you disconnect the engine from the wheels so that you could shift or whatever. But it's a good reference because there's got to be a disconnect when you are using logic. And, you know, I see so many videos. Mark Dice is one of the best for putting these videos out. What's her name? Bennett or whatever. Kaylee Bennett. I forget this blonde girl who won the lawsuit over firearms. I forget. What's her name now? Geez, now I'm forgetting it.
Not familiar.
I'll see if I can find it very quickly here. I may not be able to, but I posted some of her stuff last week. She had won some lawsuits. It's not coming up fast enough here. Just a second. Here we go. Well, I can't remember her name. I'll show her on screen. Maybe that'll be good enough here. Hold on a second. It's just a freaking commercial. All right. This girl right here. You know, she is now I just lost my freaking point. But where was I going with that?
I'm not familiar with the story, so I'm not sure how that.
Well, you know, she's just out there she's constantly doing videos exposing, I know where I was going with this, exposing liberals and how they're so tied to their emotions. And, you know, she went to, Rutgers University, and the leftists called the police on her for interviewing people on the campus because she's a conservative. And, you know, they were, you know, there's one woman in the background just repeating, "This is the spot of John Communist, what's his name?" And, you know, there's like, this woman is just repeating over and over and over for 15 minutes the same line about her communist hero and how this little brick area that she was speaking in was dedicated to this communist guy. And this woman is just going on and on for 15 minutes repeating the same thoughtless mind programming that she had been told, being against freedom of speech, being against conservatism, being against anything that wasn't a part of this, you know, her emotional outlook on life. And there's just, you know, they have no ability to disconnect their emotions, you know, and they were also saying that she couldn't be there because it was a black area only and all this, you know, racist stuff. But it was really interesting to watch this whole thing going down because these are, air quotes, university educated people who don't know how to think, who don't know how to disconnect their emotions from the facts. They've been told by their liberal communist university professors what to think, but they've never learned how to think, you know, so they confuse, you know, they need their safe spaces and whatnot, but they confuse the the emotions with the facts. They don't have an ability for logic and reason. It's like that Clint Eastwood quote: "If you could reason with Democrats, there would be no Democrats." You know.
I've never heard that one. I should say that there is an emotional basis to learning in the sense that, right? I mean, you do have emotions, right? And so a lot of times, John Taylor Gatto talks about this. Some of the institutional structures of school, in many ways, are designed to humiliate, to make you feel dumb, to basically put you in your cast, right? I mean, if you're not quick enough and you don't fill in the dotted lines the right way, in a lot of ways, it is designed to make you stay in your passions, and usually in a cynical state, right? And so, I have a lot of students all the time when they come to the tutor. You can tell they're totally overthinking it. They're overthinking it because they're freaked out because they've been told that they're not smart or that they're not good at writing, etc. And when you finally kind of just talk with them, just kind of real casual, they slowly, by the end of it, they go, oh, so I was just overthinking it. So sometimes but that's also an emotion thing. It's also because of passions. And so again, your emotional trauma-based mind control can severely impair your cognitive abilities. And if you look at some of the, if you want to look at those bell curve statistics, some of the people or some of the ethnic populations that are on the lower end of the IQ spectrum, well, statistically, those people have suffered a lot of trauma historically. And so, it could very well be that as well. So with the socio-emotional learning, I don't. And by the way, there were some of the Greeks thought that you could just be a mind without feelings, right? And in some ways, you know, this is, I don't want to call it Gnostic, but this is like a form of mysticism where knowledge is a form of you becoming a god on earth, or some sort of, it's about power over the dominion of the plane by understanding how to manipulate your environment through knowledge and wisdom, etc. So I mean, you do have to have, as Christians especially, right, we should have grace, right? And that doesn't mean that everything that you have to I don't want to use the word tolerate, but that you have to condone everything. But it does mean that you acknowledge that everybody's starting from a fallen state, and so you give them time to acknowledge to acknowledge in their own lives, right? That what we call repentance. Where have they contradicted truth? And so there's an emotional element to learning, but it is the way to integrate it into the academic system is not to track it with biofeedback technologies and then pathologize various neural algorithms. It's to give the student his or her own responsibility to manage those passions so that he or she can actually make his or her own decisions, right? How to think as opposed to what to think, right? And so that's, yeah.
Did we already cover socio-emotional race hygiene?
So that's a good place to jump next because it ties into the precision education. Okay. And so, there's lots of statistics that would show that, students of color are disciplined at a higher rate than non-students of color. White students, I guess, is the term you would use. Okay. And so there's a large push in social emotional learning in those circles to basically use these technologies to measure all of the cell data, that's the acronym, so all of the emotional neural algorithms of the students and the staff, and to find discrepancies so that they could somehow basically weed out what they would call the systemic racism in the system. But what my research shows is that long term, what'll ultimately happen is those technologies will only increase the pathologizing of normal student behaviors, or just student misbehavior, but pathologizing it as a mental health issue or criminal tendency, not only for students of color but everybody. And so it's inevitable that when you start tracking this data, your emotions in this punitive way, that I mean, the goal is to basically you're going to have more of it than less. And so I don't think that that's actually, race hygiene was a term that basically a term Hitler used for eugenics. Okay. Mental hygiene was another term that was used. It was another type of eugenics. So that had to do with the IQ. So the race hygiene had to do with everything else genetically that you would pass down through inheritance. But the mental hygiene could have a racial component to it, or it could just be focused on, did your family have a long history of not just did they have low IQs, but did they have a history of were they paupers, were they sexually promiscuous? With these types of behaviors, they would link to, your mental state, which they felt was genetically determined. And so, that term race hygiene, is basically, in the school system, that would largely be, to cleanse, what are those, the racial disparities in there, but it'll end up being something more like, the way Hitler tracked that type of data is the way I've calculated it.
It's like Antifa being the most fascist group out there.
Yeah, yeah, bike locks and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Community-oriented policing.
Oh yeah,
That's like what I call. Yeah. That's what I call. What do I call it now? When I want to think of it, I can't think of it. Policing by consensus, or it's. Is that where you're going with this? Is it along those lines? It's rule by consensus.
Well, it kind of it sounds like it has that communitarian kind of left flavor, but it really is just is a term for public-private partnerships, which I would say is corporatist, which we could say is corporate fascist as well. But the idea here is that instead of police departments handling police business, there's through all these public-private partnerships in the community schooling system and the charter schooling system. There are two addendums, and one is to basically attach mental health and health and human services to the education system, which we've talked a lot about today in the other time. But then the other is to attach the criminal justice system to it. Okay, and so instead of you having maybe sometimes you have what they call a resource officer or somebody security there that you need. It's basically like an in-house police officer that has. It's almost like this police department is kind of in limbo, or it partners outside with other private agencies, and through that they're not just tracking typical criminal behavior, but they also look at how is your behavior in the classroom, how does that maybe put you on a tendency algorithmically towards maybe some criminal tendency. Maybe you need behavioral interventions. Maybe you need some mental health interventions because you misbehaved too much. And obviously, right, that ties into just that last topic that we talked about, right, as well.
Microaggression.
Which one, me or you?
We got that as a talking point here.
Community-oriented policing is
microaggression. We had talked about that, before the show.
Yeah.
You want to go?
Yeah, I suppose that. I mean, so the term is, used to refer to, like, if you say something, you use a word in a totally, mundane context that you have no intention of meaning something, and then it, because of, your identity politics that are represented by your gender or race or whatever, that word was therefore a microaggression to somebody else. And right, they, you have offended them and, violated community standards or something like that. I get what we talked about was, is this like the high-tech version of the microaggression, meaning like, not just the words you use are microaggressions, but like if your heart rate is too fast, or right, your galvanic skin response, your skin conductivity, the electricity is too high on it, or some blood pressure is too high, your facial expressions, the facial recognition algorithm doesn't like your face, you're frowny too much, right? That's a microaggression, all that type of stuff. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Let's go into solutions for all of this stuff. We lay out all these problems with education and all the hyperbole going on and whatnot, and all the eugenics and the dystopian Huxleyan steaming piles of what. What are the solutions?
Okay, so I have a 5-point plan. Okay, and thanks to my publisher Chris Milligan for making me do that, because I don't know, I'm focused more on the problems than solutions. Sometimes I was gonna end it there, and he's like, no, no good, man. Don't just freak people out, right? He's like, give them some solutions. And actually, it's what made me really dig into a lot of the trivium stuff, more than I actually had any kind of my very surface knowledge of it prior. But so the first one is to maintain local control and to maintain public control of local control of your schools. That means locally elected school boards. Okay. Not there's a guy. He might still be the CEO of Netflix. He might still have some or board. He's a board member or something. He's a big wig at Netflix. His name's Reed Hastings, and he does a TED talk. You probably still find it where it was a while back, where he talked about how charter schools were better, the public-private system was better, the corporate system was better, because he said basically, elections are messy, and you don't have. He didn't say continuity of government, but I'm just going to use that term. Where basically you can carry your agenda from for every 4 years. You can just keep pushing that thing step by step forward. You don't have to worry about somebody, some families coming in and voting and saying, hey, we don't like this socio-emotional learning stuff. Hey, we don't want precision ed, or hey, we don't want whatever. So a lot of people, the public school system there's a lot of problems in it, but if you do away with the locally elected school board system, you're going to have the same people in charge, which is basically the federal and state government in partnership with very, very large multinational corporations, right? And so, for as messy as it is, and for us, bumpkin citizens, we're not experts, right, to be in there making decisions about how we want to live our lives. I mean, it's that's pretty. I'm pretty sure that's what our Constitution.
Yeah, because everybody else knows better for us how to live our own lives, right?
Well, experts, yes, experts always know more than
right.
Yeah. So
Nancy Pelosi knows best, right?
Yeah. Well, all the Congress, right? Yeah. All of them. Yeah. So that's the local. That's pretty much that's the main thing there. So that means no charter schools. People like to go there because they have a lot of times. Sometimes they have better what they call outcomes. But a lot of times they do funny stuff with the numbers too, right? So when you're public-private like that, sometimes they're on a lottery and they'll take the better students from the public schools nearby, or right they've been caught fudging numbers, just totally fudging test numbers. So some of that data isn't even accurate. And the other thing is, it's more important than just protecting, keeping, which is very important, to keep local control of our school systems, to keep the parents in charge is another way I should put it. Okay, because I don't talk a whole lot about it, but I mean, parents should be in charge of their kids. It should be pretty obvious, right? But I mean that.
Well, no, it's a brave new world. Haven't you heard that dropped in every other Netflix movie?
Say it again.
I said, well, it's a brave new world. Haven't you heard that line dropped in every other Netflix movie?
I thought, yeah. No, they got new Netflix shows with that as the title, right? Somebody said, I don't remember what it was.
Oh, do they have that in the title now? Wow,
a friend of mine sent me it, and he was like, dude, you got to check it out. And I never did.
Dude, it's like it cracked. I canceled my Netflix subscription like 2-3 years ago when the Obamas went on the board of directors. I was like, that's enough of that crap, and it was like every show had to have gay characters or transgender characters. It's like they're just shoving it down your throats. But, I'd be sitting there watching a movie on Netflix and they would drop, oh, it's a brave new world, and it's like, oh, come on, And
you'd be surprised how many people don't know what the
the
connotation to it either.
Yeah, right. But it's like when you know, you can't not see it. It's just such it's so
Yeah.
in your face, you know.
And and in that novel, by the way, mommy and daddy are bad words. And when the world controller comes out and he's teaching some of these new students, they're going to get
Well,
ready to
you
take
know, you,
over.
you got to have gender neutral. You know, it's parent one and parent two now. So they did get rid of mother and father, mommy and daddy, right?
Well,
You
they didn't
know,
have any parents at all there. It was just a test tube, literally, because back in that
right?
novel there
And
was
and
conveyor
then
belts and
that
yeah.
they could, inject their chemicals into to create alpha, beta, deltas, and epsilons, right? And the epsilons being those with autism, and of course it's what 1 in 20 or 1 in 40 now with autism, and it's like, oh yeah, that's something that Huxley wanted and predicted,
Well, he literally said he wanted a scientific caste system. I have all of these books over here, the colored ones. Those are all of his nonfiction essays. My dear wife bought those for me. Thank you, honey. And there's one in there, a note on eugenics, where he just talks about how it's just the best stuff. Talks about how Major Leonard Darwin's proposal to have eugenic laws based on how much money you made. Yeah, he's going to tie your income to your genes.
right, right,
But there's
right,
one
yeah.
in there where he literally mentions, he says that we should have a scientific caste system, and it should be basically just like the Brahmins over the Sudras.
Right,
He
well,
literally
yeah,
said,
that's absolutely what they were promoting, and Aldous Huxley is the single biggest psychopath I have ever studied in my life. The guy was a complete nut job.
when you
I
tell
think
people
I
about
think
that.
I think I told you. He used to live on the next mountain ridge over. And I've been to the house where he used to live, and I literally, it's well, it's too bad that the Smith and Wesson 500 wasn't invented just for him. Because there are some things that need atomizing.
He most people think that if you ever mention like the stuff we say, they'll say like, wasn't he against that stuff in that book? And they
Oh,
don't
it's
know
a
that
it's
it's a
a
dark
warning.
comedy.
It's a warning. Yeah, it's like Eric Blair or George Orwell's 1984. Well, Eric Blair was a student of, for those who don't know, Eric Blair was George Orwell's real name. But Eric Blair was a student of Aldous Huxley. You guys are getting ripped drunk tonight. I know you are. But, it's like and Eric Blair's version was rule by force, where Aldous Huxley's was rule through mind control and through cognitive submission and getting rid of the chains and getting people to think that they were free when they weren't. So Aldous Huxley's version was the final revolution. So Aldous Huxley promoted hypersexuality, psychedelic drugs. He being the architect of the CIA's MK Ultra program, basing it on his book Brave New World, etc. So when you look around society politely, with the huge holes in their ears and all of the archaic revival stuff going on, oh well, tattoos all over my body, huge ears. People don't even know that the septum piercing was for pigs and cattle, and it was for livestock, for controlling, for drugged out, and he, people, one of the biggest attacks that I get is, well, mushrooms or ayahuasca or peyote or XYZ drug was created before the CIA, therefore they couldn't be used for mind control. When all of these societies use these things to inculcate the youth into the culture, and so it's like Marlene de Rios's quote. Let me pull it up here. She talks about it, using them in the antinomian context. So she says psychedelic substances like ayahuasca create a state of hypersuggestibility in which persons are very open to being influenced by others. Many traditional cultures have utilized this condition to inculcate cultural values and behaviors in young people as they receive initiation into adulthood. In the West, counterculture, follow what the word means, counterculture, countercultural values can be inculcated in youth or in young people when using these psychedelics, especially when using them in an antinomian context. And of course, antinomian means against Christian values, or of or relating to the view that Christians are released by grace from the obligation of observing moral law. So in other words, they want to use psychedelics to promote the fall of humanity. There's a reason why the Bible opens in Genesis chapter 3 with a warning about eating the fruit of the tree and the fall of humanity. So, you have Aldous Huxley and Tim Leary talking about rolling on the floor with laughter over the use of these substances. So this is from Leary's book Flashbacks, and it's a conversation between Leary and Aldous Huxley. Sorry, guys, I don't know if you guys are even going to remember this conversation tomorrow. Your hangovers are going to be so bad. But he says, these are evolutionary matters, and this is Huxley talking to Leary. They cannot be rushed. Work privately, initiate artists, writers, poets, jazz musicians, elegant courtesans, painters, rich bohemians, and they'll initiate the intelligent rich. Okay, there's a conversation about Huxley tying it to rich people. That's how everything of culture and beauty and philosophic freedom has been passed on. Of course, that's just sophistry and nonsense. Your role is quite simple. Become a cheerleader for the evolution. That's what I did and my grandfather before me. He's referring to Thomas Henry Huxley, who is Darwin's propaganda manager, or Darwin's bulldog, promoting that horse crap. These brain drugs, mass-produced in laboratories, will bring about vast changes in society. This will happen without you or me. All we can do is spread the word. The obstacle to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible. Tim, I don't remember any discussion of brain drugs in the Bible. Timothy, have you forgotten the very first chapters of Genesis? Jehovah says to Adam and Eve, I have built you this wonderful resort eastward of Eden. You can do anything you want, except you are forbidden to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Tim, the first controlled substances. Aldous, exactly. The Bible begins with fruit and drug prohibitions. Tim, so the fall and original sin were caused by the taking of illegal drugs. By this time, Aldous was chuckling away, very pleased with himself, and I was rolling on the floor with laughter.
This is while they're dosing, apparently, is what they're talking about?
They're talking about using, they're talking about promoting the drugs to the kids to create the fall of humanity so that they can mind control everybody through the rich and elite. This is Aldous Huxley's idea of the final revolution. And then going to this quote, why would Aldous say the obstacle to this evolution, Timothy, is the Bible? They state, the first controlled substances, exactly. The Bible begins with food and drug prohibitions. So the fall and original sin were caused by the taking of illegal drugs. And then, just to prove the point that they were Satanists, Timothy Leary says, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago.
Yeah, I know about it. I've heard that quote. That one I knew, and then Huxley was friendly with him too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. These are full-blown Satanists promoting the fall of humanity through the psychedelic drugs and hypersexualization. Huxley is such a genius in all his wisdom. What he does is he reads the Bible and then he takes it and inverts it and does the exact opposite. The Bible says, if you want to build a high culture, and there's a book by Unwin, J.D. Unwin, called Sex and Civilization. And in this book, it talks about how to build a high culture, you have to suppress sexuality. So Huxley reads this book, and you can go on Wikipedia under Unwin's book, and it's like, and Aldous Huxley raved on about the importance of this book. Well, all Huxley did was take it and invert it and do the opposite. So the Bible says, to build a high society, we have to, control our sexual urges. Unwin's study says we need to control our sexual urges. So what we're going to do is we're going to give kids psychedelic or suggestogenic drugs and put them in the mud like pigs, like swine, in front of their graven images or their rock idols, Jimi Hendrix and the rest, and get them to fornicate in the mud. And then, this is the collapse of society. So he just takes what is taught in this stuff and does the exact opposite. He just inverts everything. So it's not genius, it's just psychopathy. But, you've got idiots in the CIA who took this as, we got to control the whole world and we're going to destroy our own culture and our own society with this stuff, right? So this is the foundation of all of this crap, the counter culture. So we have our culture, and they want to go counter to it and break it and destroy it. So as you know, Aldous Huxley wanted to dumb everybody down as much as possible and get them doing all of this behavior to wipe out our society. And then he and his Fabian socialist nitwits would create this new dystopian Marxist nightmare through this system. So this is what we see in progress all around us for those of us who've read the Bible and can actually see it. And for everybody else, they think that, transgender and butt sex and whatnot is their and doing as many drugs as possible is their greatest freedom. So,
well, Huxley's, it's the inversion thing. If you ever read his nonfiction, it's very interesting, because it's prose, and so in some ways, you kind of get a window into how his mind thinks in a certain way, more than his fiction, right? Because fiction is loaded with symbols and inference, and it's very Rogerian. He always starts with these two possible outcomes, and he kind of plays them off against each other. And then by the end, he tries to bring you to this middle ground, which is really more towards the opposing side than he's taking you in a direction. But the whole time, it seems like he's being very neutral and just looking at both sides. But he ends up in a very clear position by the end of it. And he's as he takes you along, he kind of, this is Carl. When I say Rogerian, I mean Carl Rogers. His approach to psychology was that instead of, essentially, the rhetorical spin on it, it's easier if I just explain it rhetorically instead of doing my ADHD thing and forgetting where I was. So in rhetoric, classical rhetoric, you take a thesis, which is like an enthymeme, and then you, from there, deduce your main points, right? And you start with your main point, and then you persuade the audience to come over to that side with your reasoning and your evidence. Okay. Right. In the Rogerian method, basically you start from this neutral position, and then you describe the other person's side, the things you agree with that side, and then you show them these other things that he or she might disagree with, and then you slowly kind of go back and forth until you've kind of nestled that person over onto the other side very gradually. That's how I was writing.
We have a couple questions. Rainey asked where in the Bible, that was a conversation between Aldous Huxley and Larry discussing that, but that is Genesis 3 of the Bible, where it talks about the fruit of the tree. Also, Carl Rogers was part of the CIA's MKUltra subproject 97, and that is right there. And he influenced Marshall Rosenberg's nonsense, nonviolent communication and neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. And of course, that was more mind control to focus on your feels rather than the facts of a situation. So more CIA stuff. Let's see. Who was it? Somebody asked to what end. Who was that? Stefan Thurman asked to what end. All of this is about social control, social engineering, control of by the few of the masses. That's really what it comes down to. And getting, it's mind controlling people. It's getting people to believe lies rather than following truth, following logos, which is what you and I have been discussing here, John, throughout this three-part series. So, it's all about simply controlling the mass population and dumbing them down as far as possible. And we're going to get into another solution here in just a moment, but in the 1800s in the single-room schoolhouses, the solution was teaching the trivium, and we created one of the highest cultures ever in a matter of decades by teaching the trivium in these single-room schoolhouses, and that was a big no-no. So in the early 1900s, they wiped out the single-room schoolhouses and created this system of grade education that we have now, whereas the reason why the single-room schoolhouses were so good was that the older students taught the younger students, and by the time they finished 8th grade, they had the equivalent of what would be a or a bachelor's degree education today. And most bachelor's degree students couldn't pass an 8th grade graduation test from the 1880s or 1890s today. So probably myself included. So I was
Might
just
add to that too. Another end is to literally become their own gods. I mean,
so,
because
and Rupert Fellows is saying LSD is not a sex drug; it reduces libido. It's all about hypersuggestion. They're getting people high on drugs. You can look at the videos of Woodstock, of the free love, free sex thing, and of the '60s and Haight Ashbury and all of that. The summer of love and all of this stuff, and then you can make a little connection there and stop trying to, maybe for you in particular it reduces libido, but certainly for everyone it doesn't, and it also depends on dosage as well. But there was a reason why it was called the Summer of Love. They were promoting hypersexuality. The same, that's why they all the naked girls and boobies everywhere at Woodstock and all this stuff. And you can go back into my archives in the earlier shows. I went to Woodstock and did a whole bunch of shows exposing all of that and the fraud behind that and whatnot. So the same people involved in Woodstock as Aleister Crowley, who was the guy we said earlier. I'm already forgetting now. What was
oh,
his name?
Rogers
Oh, Joseph Campbell, this
Campbell.
clown here.
Sorry.
Joseph Campbell lived at the Maverick Festival at Woodstock. He lived there, Woodstock, New York, and he was behind the creation of a lot of this stuff. So these guys all worked together. He was a big Crowleyite, while Aleister Crowley was on Esopus Island in the Hudson River about 20 miles away, painting on the rocks, "Do what thou wilt" is the whole of the law, which of course is an Islamic reference. Islam worships will, whereas Christianity worships logos. And so all the Satanists worship will, Islam worships will. But at the Maverick, it was their creed was "do what you want to," which is the same thing as "do what thou wilt." So this guy Joseph Campbell, he's made into a hero, ironically, the hero's journey, but he was a big time psychopath and nut job. But Star Wars is based on his stuff. So anyway, let's get into. Did we talk about digital student? Let's talk about
Number two.
abolish psychological conditioning next.
Yeah, so that means two things. We talked about what we mean by the psychological conditioning method in education. It basically means what's called the behaviorist method, or what B.F. Skinner called operant conditioning. His predecessors called it behaviorism. People like John B. Watson. And then, the precursor to that would have been classical conditioning, also known as stimulus response conditioning, which goes back to Wilhelm Wundt, who we mentioned was basically the godfather of laboratory psychology as a science, as opposed to a subdiscipline of philosophy. And so, those methods they largely target the nervous system. The Pavlov's dog is one of the most well-known examples of how stimulus response, operant and slash behaviorist conditioning all work. It's basically on this mechanism of when you are exposed to a particular stimulus in the environment that triggers a behavioral response at the nervous system level, and that you can condition people to have particular responses to particular stimuli by associating those stimuli with rewards and punishments. And so, as opposed to teaching people to use their own minds to identify the environment around them, and to understand it through formal logos, uh, from their own thinking, from their own mind, you basically bypass the reason, you bypass the thinking process, and you target the nervous system. This has been a method that's been deployed in schools since as early as John Dewey. Okay, and so this is over 100 years basically, and at the early stages, it's largely about scheduling particular lessons as stimuli to elicit particular responses on a schedule. Okay, a good way that you might have seen, everybody probably has actually seen this growing up in the classroom. Be this, maybe you remember they had gold stars versus detentions, right? I mean, this is just one little system, right? The whole breaking down or the of the arts and sciences into these hyper specialized subjects is also part of it, right? Because you're narrowing down the stimuli so that they elicit very specific responses. And then the bell system, right? So, you're for 30-minute or 30-minute class, about 75-minute class, okay? And then the bell rings, you go to the next class, and then the bell rings, and you go, just like Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell, here's the food. And the dog salivates by association. So that means abolish these methods in terms of how you actually administer, paper and pencil curriculum, how you administer discipline, motivation, all this type of stuff in the classroom. The second level of that means to remove all of the behaviorist technologies. This means the stimulus response technologies that we talked about in previous podcasts, uh, such as the adaptive learning software, which basically works on the stimulus response mechanism. The stimuli is whatever question answer window you have to respond to. Maybe it has a video or some other illustration. Okay, then your response, based on your response, the speed of it and the accuracy of it, it'll give you an algorithm, and that algorithm will therefore track you either into academic curriculum or career pathways, workforce training curriculum. So it means to abolish the psychological conditioning method at the paper and pencil or the old school level, but it certainly also means not just to abolish the current technologies, but to prevent them from progressing into data mining and socially engineering students at the nervous level.
Digital student privacy.
So digital student privacy means, I'm not a Luddite. I mean, we're on the internet right now. We're using technology. I mean, this stuff is good in many, many ways. But we have to have privacy. We have to have some kind of privacy moving forward here. I mean, if individual rights and you having sovereignty over your own consciousness in any way in a democratic republic where you actually get to have your own free will means anything, then you have to have the Fourth Amendment. You have to have a certain standard of privacy. And so that means that, we know that all of these technologies, in some ways, they have to have a certain level of data mining because they operate on data feedback. I mean, just to maintain systems, to update and things, you have to, it has to have a data feed. So that means that either the data, certain data certainly should not be tracked at all. Okay. But some data, if it absolutely has to be tracked, it needs to be stored as a medical record or a HIPAA record or something like that. I'm also not against, the, using behaviorist methods. This has actually been shown to be used for people that do actually that are on the spectrum. Okay, some of these methods have been shown to work. I've had people that actually work in some of the places that are also against it, but there's literature that says that it works. But insofar as we're going to use any of these new technologies, biofeedback and stuff like that, there could be good uses for some of this stuff. It has to be treated as a medical device and a medical record that only the doctor should see, and it shouldn't be being passed from teacher to nurse to the school resource officer, etc. And there should also be what some states are trying to pass, which is called the right to be forgotten law. So, when the student reaches 18, that student can erase, maybe the student can erase all that data. Or, and by the way, I talked about having it broader consumer rights for just the devices we use. I think that should be a law that we should have just all around, but at the school level, certainly. I do want to take this time to also mention the reason why I see that, that there is a space for that is because, in some ways, I think that the transhumanist technologies might be inevitable, and that is because there are several technologies for the brain-computer interfaces which are applied to help people with very serious conditions, which I don't think anybody would want to not help them with. And those include epilepsy, paralysis, um, things like that. If you and I actually had a really close friend that had epilepsy and stuff. He recently passed away. And so like I've thought about that many times. But the strange thing is that it's on a slippery slope because I always use the example of Oscar Pistorius, right? He was faster than people that had regular legs, okay? And so the person that was once had a disability, once they interface with these technologies, these brain computer interfaces, I mean, they might be able to do things that a non augmented person cannot do, which is going to create the incentive for, well, now we have to compete, and so everybody needs to somehow get on board or be left behind as a the digital split. So that is just something that I think we'll have to figure out as we go. But certainly moving in, as much as we're going to be inching in that direction, we have to absolutely be very, very careful about how we move forward. But also we need to have way more privacy and way less data mining. I mean, and maybe there's a way to put that together. Um, but certainly, just student records, yeah, shouldn't be data mining, students' emotions and all this basically non-academic stuff that has no bearing on whether or not they should be going to college, etc.
What's the best way? Yeah, and it's like, okay, I've had friends actually get run out of college because they were conservative Christians.
Run out like weren't allowed to go in, or you mean they were already in the school and
They were
they
in the
just
school and got ran out.
Yeah, I could see that. I had a funny experience. I was kind of like apolitical for the longest time, and when I went to college, I just remember during the Bush years, I was like, "Hey, this isn't right. I don't like this war stuff," and everybody loved it. And then when Obama started doing the war stuff, I was like, "Hey, that's bad," and people that I was really close with, so
Oh,
not
you're a
everybody.
racist, John, if you don't support anything Obama
Oh, they just
does.
didn't look at me. They just walked. They just walked away. They literally I'd say like hi, and they'd act like I wasn't there. It was one of the strange. That was one of my first understandings of
When you
just
have a
the
black Muslim president, you can't have, thinking is just not allowed, right?
Well, I mean, it for a lot of people, it was a dream come true. I mean, and it symbolized a lot of things in a lot of ways. There could be a lot of positive things. I mean, just the idea that we finally had a black president. But I mean, it's
Right.
like we talk about. Let's apply the same standard to everybody. War is
Right. Well,
bad for
you
Bush.
should,
War is
yeah.
bad for Obama.
Well, Obama did 10 times more airstrikes than George W. Bush, And of course, nobody wants to admit that. Of course, they want to be the party of peace and whatnot, but nobody wants to admit that. I lived in Serbia in the '90s with my ex when the Clintons were bombing Serbia. And it was like, the everything that I saw on the news versus what was happening on the ground was totally different. And that was when I really woke up to how much the mainstream media lies about foreign policy, and it was a real eye opener watching the
Yeah.
Clintons at work on the ground over there. Let's get to how do we get back to the basics with all of this?
So okay. Oh yeah, we're on. Okay. Yeah. So that means going back to the classical method. It means going back to the trivium, basically, right? Grammar, logic, rhetoric, right? Understanding, right? The basis that what we just talked about, right?
Right.
That truth means you apply a standard to the same standard to all
You don't think
situations,
with
right?
emotion. Yeah, it's not the relativist fallacy. This only applies to the white guy and not the black Muslim guy, etc.
Yeah, and I looked at in that chapter, you know, yeah, I largely juxtaposed it. It's that chapter is very philosophical, and I juxtapose it with, the new system is what we would call deconstructionism, right? And so, it's not just the behaviorist method. The behaviorist method is basically targeting the nervous system, like we just said. But then, there's also an undergirding philosophy that goes along with this, and this is called deconstructionism. Okay? It has other flavors and other branches. There's stuff called thing theory, object-oriented ontology. They all are on this same spectrum of what you often call moral relativism, or just relativism in general. Okay, but we talk about logos, and they have a term. They call us logocentric, and we should instead. You're supposed to be text centric, and this is a term they use. It's a deconstruction. Essentially, what it means is that, right, the meaning is not grounded in the truth of reality. The meaning is grounded somewhere in the text, but the text is actually an artifact in space and time relative to the person that distributed it. So it actually has different meanings depending on who reads it and when they read it. Right? That's
Right.
the opposite of yes.
And you don't want to ever fact check their citations and their work or anything, because then you expose their intellectual academic fraud and whatnot, and that's never good. Yeah, but see, in logic, the first axiom of logic is that reality is real, and then you work from there. But for this nonsense to work, they first have to attack reality and say that it's all relative based on time and who wrote it and whatnot. And, never mind the person's agenda who wrote it, and if they were lying or telling the truth, if they were fudging their citations, etc. So you ignore all of that. You ignore these academic circle jerks that we talked about at the beginning of the show, or I don't know if it was before the show started, but all of this stuff ends up playing into it, but they don't want people to know how to think. They want to tell people what to think, and that's the major difference. Universities used to teach people how to think, and in fact, in the single-room schoolhouse days, people were taught how to think by the time they were, 13, 14 years old. And so this is why in the 1800s you had kids that could run corporations, whereas today most kids can't get accomplish much of anything, right? So it was and people, it was a rugged life. You went out and you went out and you helped the family, you went out and you farmed, you ran the cattle herds, you did all of these things. You didn't think that food was something that you got from the grocery store out of a wrapper. You went out and you grew and raised your own food, and it's like, people today are so emotionally driven that they think that their food is an emotional issue. Oh, well, I don't want to kill this. It's like, it's my cow. Oh my God. I'm just, it's a chicken. Oh my God. If I just eat this soy burger, the world would be so much better. Oh my God. So they don't even get that all life comes from the consumption of other life, and it's just how it is. And stop eating my cow's food, with your vegan and vegetarianism. My cow needs that stuff,
Well, that might be a good place to actually to jump into number 5 then too, because metaphysics, right? Like
right.
a first cause. Right, metaphysics is not the new agey stuff that you find in the new age section in the bookstore about.
It's the part that comes. It's the part that comes before physics, metaphysics.
Yeah, right. And so, right, a good way to illustrate that, and in some ways, this is kind of where it does kind of have, I want to say that, but in the classical sense of the word, spiritual dimension, which is. I always tell my colleagues, I say, you guys are going to think I'm a bumpkin when I say this, but I'm still convinced by the cosmological argument, right? So I came from daddy came from grandpa came from great grandpa. You keep going back. Eventually,
all the way tied back to your ancestors, all the way through time. So are you saying that your ancestors didn't climb out of a mud puddle all at once? And
I can actually. I don't subscribe to that, but I can be agnostic or skeptical on how the actual physics played out its development. But we have to admit that even the physics, right? Even the cause and effect of, it doesn't have to be human beings. It can be the cause and effect of chemistry.
Well, my question, John, would be, since all life consumes other life, just a fact, How many life forms crawled out of the primordial mud all at once to feed the other life forms?
There's a perfect absurdity, right? Which the absurdity I was getting toward was, right, how did something come from nothing, right?
Right.
Whatever, the
Well, you
physics
get
that is matter, how did it come from nothing?
the Big Bang and the black hole. For those who get the joke.
Yeah, you told me about that joke beforehand. I was not
Big
privy to
bang
that
and
prior.
a big bang in the black hole. Come on, people, you can get this. You can get it. You can get it.
So and again, even if we want to use these scientific tropes, the Big Bang, evolution, that still does not preclude the cosmological argument. What was the uncaused cause? If every effect came from a cause, what was the first thing? The first thing had to be an uncaused cause. The first thing couldn't be an effect, right?
Well, and then it comes back to logos. So,
and this is where, right, and exactly, and by the way, this is why this is the basis for the golden rule, because this means that the universe was here before we were here. The universe was here before our consciousness was here, which means that everybody has this same equal right to be here as everybody else, regardless of what your consciousness might think or feel. And so, right, this is also the beginning of logos in ethics, right? And so, there's people that will tell you, as colleagues of mine will tell you that, that you can have an empirical metaphysics, that it doesn't have to, you can have a metaphysics without the cosmological argument. Oftentimes, people actually, people like that will oftentimes cite Nietzsche. Well, Nietzsche's basically, if Nietzsche had a first cause, it was will. Okay, and so you're still left in a very agnostic position.
if it was will, then you're a Satanist Muslim, right? Which Nietzsche was. So,
well, certainly in a position where
he gave himself syphilis to prove a point, which didn't turn out so well.
Who did that?
Nietzsche.
Oh yeah. Well, some people say, well, did he really have it, or did he just go mad?
Yeah. Rupert makes a good point. In the beginning was
absolutely.
the one, and the one became two, and then the two created three. And then.
Yeah, well, but when will is your metaphysics, Nietzsche was a guy that thus spoke Zarathustra, when he talks about the murder of God. I used to hear that and going through college, and God is dead, and I was like, what? But he actually wasn't saying that and clapping his hands. He was saying that like, we have no basis, we have no logos now, and so he tried to come up with basically what later would become existentialism. This, he called it transvaluation. Basically, it was largely based on courage and will, and just somehow pushing forward with your, just with your will. And when you're in that state, just like we said, you're prone to, if not, destined to relativism and contradiction, because right at some point your will is going to run up against reality, and you're going to have to go, oh, I need to not have will right now. I need to remove myself from the passions and think about, and conform myself
The
to
natural
order,
man, right?
So,
well,
so that was why I ended with,
That's the whole foundation behind Huxley's Brave New World and the CIA's MK Ultra program, et cetera, is to get everyone to leave high culture, high thought, high everything, and return back to the natural man. Do what thou wilt is the whole in the law. So, not the whole of the law, the whole in the law, correcting Aleister Crowley's nonsense. But once you realize that it's the whole in the law, and then it's do what thou wilt, return back to the natural man, fornicating in the mud like swine, etc., to your graven images or rock idols, then you can get the whole gig that they've been promoting. Let's finish with... you want to talk about the multiverse and Sean Carroll?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so because it relates to the metaphysics, right?
Right, and then we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, for sure. So Sean Carroll is a guy. He's like he speaks on quantum physics and things like that. And he was talking about the multiverse and the alternate reality, the simulation theory, all this type of stuff. There's many different yous. There's me and you talking right now. Where
right. Of course, yeah, and of course the onus of proof is on him to prove any of it. But never mind such logical necessities.
Oh, well, there's no onus on him because what he says at the end of it is that, well, at the end of the day, you should still behave as with as if classical mecanics was the only truth, and as if classical morality based
So
on
he
formal logic and metaphysics.
so he negates his own hyperbole.
Yeah, and I don't, to me, it's like, what's the point in discussing this stuff if it doesn't have any grounding in reality? Now, there's quantum logic can produce certain, computational feats that, that are objective that you can actually, demonstrate. But, when you start talking about, right, the simulation thing, what it seems like to me is propaganda to get everybody excited about living in VR for the rest of their lives. But yeah, for him, he basically says not only does he refute his own stuff, but he essentially defers to what we're saying. He says that, you should basically behave as if there is one truth that comes from a transcendent cause that everybody has to conform to objectively through grace and civility.
Hold on a second. I was just responding. So, that's a good place to wrap it up, I think. You got any more you want to add?
No, I think that's a good place. Did I ADHD? I did. Well, I didn't. But I want to go real fast. But I go back to the Internet of Things on the AR. So what I was saying was the cool thing would be you drive up to the city, your brain chip is in, and as you pull up to these buildings, little pop-up menus come up in your retinal feed, and they'll tell you how many people are in the building. Is there traffic here? When you see people in public, their Facebook profile will pop up, and you can know all the stuff about them. You can figure out whether you want to talk to them before you even have to breach conversation, right? And so then, of course, the Trojan horse though is then you're being tracked nonstop biologically. But yeah, that's all. I'll stop there. And then thanks again to everybody that bought books and stuff.
And
buy.
thanks for
you. Thanks.
You're welcome. And buy John's book, School World Order. Hopefully, y'all got a lot out of this series. And thank you so much, John. Thanks to those of you who threw up super chats during the show, Mr. Winters, Rianne, there's a number of you who did, or Rainey, a number of you who did. Much appreciated, as well as, who else? They're all in there. Anyway, appreciate it so much, all the support and love. Please hit the subscribe and get your notifications as well. And please donate to the show through Patreon and also through, and I'm throwing the links up there right now, which are down in the show description. You can also go to logosmedia.com and whatnot and subscribe and donate there. We can't do it without you. Been doing the show for 12 years, and of course we are running on the backup channel because of Steve Outram's bogus copyright claims to try to shut down my channel after his many years of harassment and trolling and all the things that he does with his... what do they call those things? LARPers and whatnot. He runs teams of trolls and whatnot that go around and harass different hosts. But hopefully the main channel will be back up soon so we can live broadcast from there again soon. I will upload this episode there. It's, like I said earlier tonight, this is also being broadcast on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, here, etc. I think it's being broadcast on four places on Facebook. So anyway, thank you everybody, and have a great night.
Thanks again.